Welcome back to Echo Ridge. Today, we're going to turn this into this, because quite frankly, it's giving me a headache. Here's the issue. It is cycle 2063, and yet I haven't used any water. I'm still trying to use up all the water down here. I have managed to fill a whole bunch of buffer tanks, and yet the water levels were still not going down. This is due in part to our petroleum generators producing polluted water and also our natural gas generators producing polluted water. And I know it's not a big deal because more water equals better, right? Well, it usually does until the fact that, well, I just can't get rid of it, and I need this space for a future tutorial. Now, I could just dump it all into the vacuum of space, but that seems rather haphazard, so we will not be doing that. But in the interest of trying to use more water, I've gone to a couple of extreme steps. One, I've put in a pair of soda fountains, because what's better than a dupe hopped up on caffeine and sugar? And as you know, they require fresh water. 5 kilos per use. I've also added yet another arbor tree. Remember, this ranch used to only have one arbor tree, and now we're up to 3. Each arbor tree requires 70 kilos worth of polluted water per cycle, so I was hoping that would take in a little bit more water. You may also be thinking, well, Echo, why don't you just grab another dupe? And that way your spawn has to consume more water in order to provide more oxygen for more dupes. Well, I've done the math based on our best guesstimates as far as how often these natural gas and petroleum generators, we don't have quite enough to support one more duplicant. Which, by the way, we're creating so much power in and around this colony, these haven't been on in the last 5 cycles. That's a problem I'm gonna have to fix later. Well, not really a problem, but just an area of concern. But anyways, like I was saying, I've tried increasing water output through a myriad of means just to try to get rid of all this water. Hence the reason I started pumping it into all these buffer tanks. But then while I was looking at that, I realized, man, this is a ridiculous mess. And I reached that point somewhere around the time when I added a second water sieve to ensure that we can keep cleaning the polluted water into clean water, but then also when I added yet another liquid shutoff to this system. Alright, hear me out. Right now, the way this system works is we get nothing but polluted water in from our source on the second planetoid. That polluted water has to be cleaned, but before it does, it needs to be warmed up. So it goes through this chain of buffer tanks and then is eventually used as a coolant in our open sauna, and that way it's plenty warm enough before it ends up in this tank. This tank is then pumped over and across into the bathroom sieve system, but it's done so only at a 1-to-1 ratio of how much water is added to the clean water tank. The clean water tank is controlled by a hydro sensor, and when it turns green, it lets more clean water in and then sends more polluted water into the bathroom system to be then cleaned and then added back, which we then have a liquid pump here that then sends the water to all of our clean water requirements, including our soda fountains, our food rehydrators, don't even get me started on those, and then eventually our oxygen. I then had to put in another system because occasionally this whole line would get backed up depending on the usage of our water, and then duplicants wouldn't be able to use the bathroom. So now I have more automation in here, and you've probably seen this system that I've used for hydrogen backup reasons. The hydrogen uses this bridge, but if it ever gets backed up, it'll overflow into this pipe, triggering this gas element sensor before then being prioritized back on the line. But by triggering that gas element sensor, it turns the hydrogen generators on and says, hey, we need to use more hydrogen. Well, likewise here, when this liquid pipe element sensor detects polluted water, it means we're a little bit too backed up in the pipes. It sends a green signal to this liquid shutoff, which says, hey, we don't want any more polluted water until we're able to clean all of this. So despite this liquid shutoff originally doing a 1-to-1 ratio with this clean water, more clean water will fall, but no more polluted water will go back into the system. Now, as complicated as all that is, it works. But our water system shouldn't be that complicated. Also, considering that we're down to our last 17 databanks with no plans to gain more, we are completely done with research on this planetoid. Just based on the databanks we're able to achieve from both planetoids, we're able to get new media, environmental appreciation, high velocity transport, solid management, and even hydrocarbon propulsion. So the long and short of it is, I don't need this clean water tank anymore for the purposes of research. I also have never really needed this polluted water tank, except as an area to store more polluted water, and at this point to keep it cool. Because remember, once again, this polluted water source is coming from the coolant of the open air sauna, and the coolant being provided to the metal refinery. So the goal today is to simplify our plumbing system. Maybe not necessarily simplify, but at least streamline. I also don't love the fact that basically all our water has to tie up in a bathroom system, so we have quite a bit of germs. We'll end up fixing that today too. Before I get started on that, I figured I'd show you a few updates in and around the colony. First, our meteor system has been working flawlessly. I've even extended the cooling loop to include all of the bunker tiles, which means the bunker tiles are now sitting at 24 degrees, so the slime meteors, when they hit them, don't flash into dirt. As a quick point though, the bunker doors do not share temps in the same way the bunker tiles do, so you have to make sure that you have a conductive panel behind each and every single one of them. But the whole system has been working flawlessly. I did receive some comments that said, hey Echo, you don't necessarily need this many space scanners because the doors will end up shutting before the meteors get there. I'd just rather be safe than sorry, and as you can see, our scan network quality is 100%, so it gives me that warm and fuzzy for the eventuality that I hit play and don't come back to the computer. Which, by the way, I have noticed, and I wanted to ask everybody if they've noticed the same bug. I'll step away from the computer for a couple of hours and just let ONI run in the background. When I come back to the computer occasionally, the game's just closed. I don't get the dupe error message that says, hey, we've crashed. It's like the game just quit the desktop without any sort of notification. So let me know in the comments below if you've seen anything like that. We've also expanded our ethanol production. Because of the increase in the amount of trees, we now have 4 ethanol distillers, along with 4 buffer tanks of spare ethanol. And despite that, we still have huge stacks of lumber sitting here and over here. All that lumber is being gathered at the Pip Ranch and being shipped by rail and then hitting a 50-50 split, so half of it ends in between these 2 ethanol distillers and half of it ends with these 2 ethanol distillers. And because of that, we can now afford 2 petroleum generators, despite the fact they've only ran 18% in the last 5 cycles. We have them set on 90-50. We've also revamped the open air sauna just a little bit so that I could squeeze a power control station in here. So now we're getting 3,000 watts per petroleum generator and 1,200 watts from the hydrogen generator. This is on top of the potential power of the 1,200 watts from each natural gas generator, nor the fact that we have a bunch of metal volcanoes with steam turbines connected to smart batteries. So we're generating quite a bit of power here as well. And yes, I'd love to put some power control stations on a few of these volcanoes like this one, and especially this one, considering not only is this thermal aqua tuner responsible for chilling all this iron, it's also responsible for the largest cooling loop that I've ever done. We just don't have a lot of room around here. Now there's probably some setup to where I could squeeze the power control station in here, but I'd have to sacrifice something or just make it look incredibly ugly, and quite frankly, we just don't need the power. Even though I am trying to think of ways to increase our power consumption, because the next tutorial I'm coming out with is a geothermal power plant, where we're going to gut this entire magma biome. I've also expanded some chlorine plant production to include a whole bunch of balm lilies, and we've even started adding some dasher salt vines. I have some extra chlorine storage here, in that way when the room does get above 4 kilos worth of pressure, this gas pump will start storing it in this gas reservoir so that we don't get an overpressure state from this gas vent. But that storage is there so that we can last through the dormancy period of this chlorine gas vent, which has a monstrous dormancy period of over 80 cycles. And with each dash of salt vine requiring 6 grams per second, which equals 3,600 grams per cycle or 3.6 kilos, when you multiply that times a rough estimate of 80 cycles that this vent is going to be dormant, that's 288 kilos worth of chlorine gas that this one dash of salt vine is going to use in that time. I figured it's still okay. We'll end up not having chlorine for a little bit of that time, so the balm lilies will stop growing, but I wanted a little bit of salt, and this is one way to get it. because once we have the salt, we can turn it into table salt at our wonderful rock crusher, which then provides little salt shakers for all of our mess tables, which gives us a +1 to morale, which then erases the -1 to morale for eating the rehydrated food. Which, by the way, I wanted to let you know that you very much should not highlight your mouse over all your dried surf and turf or whatever dried food you have, because as you can see, it slows down the game quite a bit. Now this could be my fault because I have 2,816 packages of dehydrated surf and turf sitting here. The last sort of update I have to give you is we took care of our second planetoid. I suppose that's one way you could put it. We dug out every last piece of material on the planetoid and then set up a permanent sweep command so the duplicants dropped everything off at these automatic dispensers, which the autosweeper then picked up and threw into this conveyor loader that was set onto all and shipped it all back to our home planetoid. It took several hundred cycles, but now our permanent colony here is very, very simple, which this is a good point of where we start our plumbing refab because we've simplified the system greatly here. We have 5 smart batteries here, being given way more power than they'll ever need by all these solar panels, and the only thing all that power is required for is this liquid pump. When this cool slush geyser erupts, the pump sends all of that polluted water over to our home colony, not before chilling down these metal tiles to ensure that these jumbo batteries never overheat. The only limitation is the amount of storage here, so we have to make sure that we allow near 100% throughput of the polluted water to our home colony. And right now we're able to do that because all that water comes down and then is stored in all these buffer tanks. And you'll notice that right now our cooling loop is not moving, and it's not moving because this metal refinery is trying to output its polluted water coolant, and the whole system is sort of backed up because we have it turned off by use of this hydro sensor. So this tank can't take any more polluted water. But as more clean water is used, more polluted water will then take its place through the earlier system that we showed you before, which will then get the whole loop running again. No big deal. But it does get me thinking, do we really want to do this system anymore? I really like it because it's a very effective way of warming up our water. But there's a part of me that just wants to streamline this and send it directly to the water sieves, turn it into clean water, and then just store the clean water for whenever we need it. Because this whole convoluted system definitely has the echo thumbprint where I've made this entirely too complicated. Alright, I've been staring at this for way too long, trying to figure out the solution that I want to use. So I'm going to take a bit of my own advice is when you have a large problem that you're facing, let's try to break it up into individual parts. And I think the first problem is that our cooling loop is beholden to our metal refinery. So we're going to separate this out first. And while I still want to keep the open air sauna because I've never had one before and I like this a lot, I think it's time to put a standard metal refinery cooling loop in. And I've already said I have plenty of power, so why don't I use a thermo aqua tuner and a brick system to not only cool the metal refinery, but also make sure the oxygen stays right exactly where we want it. So step 1, let me clear out some space by getting rid of these liquid reservoirs, which is going to give me another 10 tons of water bottle, even though I already have a lot of water bottles sitting around here, but I can't add them to the system because it will overflow and our duplicants will get sopping wet whenever they come to do business down here. So while this is probably temporary, let me reroute this water so that it goes from here all the way over to the electrolyzers. I'll also stop the flow from here for now so we can use the rest of this. And we're going to make some room and expand this brick here. And while I do want to make sure that we're warming up that polluted water so that we can turn it into clean water, I don't think we're going to be using this method anymore. We'll build a separate system for that. So it is time to separate the ingest from right there. Man, I hope I don't break too many things in the time it takes me to do this. We also get a nice little update of a meteor shower so I can show you exactly how this is working. Now, you might be a little worried that the polluted water is going to heat up a little too much when it comes to this regolith. So far, I have not seen that happen. You'll notice the polluted water is already up to 52 degrees here because this regolith is so hot. Here it gets up to 83, but unless we have some sort of cataclysmic meteor shower that I haven't seen yet in about 500 cycles, so far the polluted water has been able to hold because there's so many bunker doors that are still at that nice cold temperature, so it helps keep the polluted water regulated until the doors open and the regolith can fall. I've also updated the buffer gate to where these mechanized airlocks stay open just long enough to ensure that everything that is going to fall has time to do so before they close and then start taking care of all the giant piles of regolith. And yeah, the bunker doors that the regolith was sitting on, for instance, this one here, is up over 90 degrees, but as you can see, it is quickly cooling back down. So far, here's our setup. I've managed to reroute all the rails that were going through this area. Still have some cleanup to do here. Now I need to reroute this hydrogen line. Not too big of a deal. And we're also going to get back through here so that I can extend the oxygen cooling pipes to go through the full brick now. Alright, that looks a lot better, except now I gotta reroute the hydrogen line once again because I can't put a bridge through here because it would connect the thermo-oxygenator steam room with our cool plate, and that just is no bueno. Suppose I can do it all the way over here though. That'll work out just fine. Probably wouldn't be smart putting our oxygen line through the steam room either. Alright, I'm definitely not changing spaghetti to spaghetti. This is gonna look cleaner, I hope. Please. Alright, that's a little bit better. I feel less in the mood for pasta after that change. Now's the time to start moving around all of the cooling pipes. And I think we'll start with the metal refinery pipes because we're going to need to make sure it has enough room to release any sort of heat being created by, for instance, making steel, which is going to make this cooling line a little awkward to be in here. Okay, what do we think of this? Because I kind of like it. It's cleaner than it looks, I promise. The metal refinery comes out, circles around. I tried to give it as much area as I can to make sure that the coolant is sufficiently cooled before it heads back into the metal refinery. And the main cooling loop, keeping all the metal bricks cool, is circling around it. Considering we're done with mass steel production, we're up to over 206 tons, so the only time we even use the metal refinery is when we get some excess lime. But I'm thinking once this cooling loop is fully charged, it should have no problem keeping everything cool, especially considering all these metal tiles made out of cobalt will fill this entire area. I've also added a liquid reservoir to the cooling loop, which helps average out those temperatures a little bit. Now let me just get this thing full, and I'll do that by draining some of this existing loop here. The question becomes, can this one thermal aqua tuner keep this cool, our oxygen, and this area cool? I mean, I don't see why not. I made another change, and that is I didn't want a bunch of carbon dioxide sitting in this gap here, so I've filled it with polluted water. Now, I did an experiment in the past comparing the effectiveness on metal tiles versus a tile of polluted water, considering the polluted water represents 1,000 kilos worth of thermal mass compared to only 100 kilos in your metal tile. The long and short of it is very dependent on your use case, but the metal tile has specific heat capacity of 0.42, but a thermal conductivity of 100, whereas the polluted water has a specific heat capacity of 4.1 and a thermal conductivity of only 0.58, which means the cobalt tile transfers thermals a lot faster, but the polluted water holds those thermals for longer. Either way, they're both better than carbon dioxide, which is what was sitting in here when I originally finished. I ended up putting a system in here to check the thermals of the coolant coming out of the metal refinery. Because we were so backlogged on lime, the dupes were using the metal refinery quite often, which is not going to be a big deal in the future because they'll be all caught up and we're only making steel every so often. But now we can check the coolant temperature to make sure it's never going to get too hot before heading back into the metal refinery. The thermosensor checks the packet of polluted water, and if it's below 30 degrees, it allows it to pass. If not, it'll sit here and wait until the cooling loop has time to cool it back down. And so far, it's been very effective. With this whole system now completely cut off from the rest of the colony, the only thing we have to make sure of is that we're disposing of all the waste polluted water coming from the petroleum generators and the natural gas generators. We also have to move all of these buffer tanks, because right now these were just our ingest, but there's really no reason to have them sitting over here because they're not heading over into this area. So to clean this whole place up, I think maybe this will be a good area? Oh, sweet, glorious buffer tanks. Lend me your storage. Now all that polluted water is going to come in from the second planetoid and be welcomed by these 24 buffer tanks. Now the question is, what are we going to do next? We could separate the usage of these two water sieves, one just being bathroom and the other cleaning all of this water, and then just keep the bathroom system in its own loop. And I think that's probably the smartest method. But doing this, we're going to have one limitation, and that's the fact that one water sieve has a maximum throughput of 5 kilos per second. But as long as we know that, we can make sure that's okay. In this particular use case, we know it is, because this cool slush geyser is only going to produce 1.4 kilos per second. And considering we have enough of a backlog for its eruption periods, we should be just fine with the maximum throughput of the water sieve. So I say step 1, let's disconnect the trees and make sure the bathroom system is completely independent. Hopefully doing all this without having the dupes pee themselves. Getting rid of this whole nonsense system has been quite enjoyable. I no longer have to worry about systems interfering with other systems because we're streamlining everything. The only thing you have to make sure of in your bathroom loop, because the duplicants end up producing more polluted water than clean water they're using, you have to have an overflow here. So for now, the overflow is going to be to these trees, which are also being fed by all this excess water here. So it's always the in-between of these projects that get a little complicated. The primary source of this water is obviously coming from the other planetoid, but we still need to use up the rest. For instance, everything out of these buffer tanks. So our new main line that siphons up all the polluted water from the generators will head down this path here, whereas it'll break off to make sure there's always some for our fertilizer, along with everything that was in those buffer tanks, and the rest will meet up with our polluted water ingest site. Yes, very technical term. Now the problem we're going to face is all of this water is sitting at minus 8.9 degrees. I can't send this through the sieve yet. It's too cold. So the question becomes, how am I going to heat all of this water? There are a lot of ways we could do it, and some of them are very, very efficient. For instance, possibly counterflowing them with something that travels on our rails. We had the very efficient method of using it as coolant to keep an area of our base cool. But remember, my mission today is not necessarily efficiency, but simplicity plus efficiency. Okay, here's what I've come up with so far. All the water is coming in, either from our colony or from the other planetoid, and filters through all these wonderful buffer tanks. But then I have a heat system over here. Notice we have a bunch of metal tiles that sit on the edge of an insulated room. The water comes out of the last buffer tank and then rotates through the atmosphere before it gets to the metal tiles, and then heads back to, once again, a thermosensor and a liquid shutoff setup. Here, the shutoff is going to make sure the water is above 2 degrees before it lets it pass. And considering we have 3 space heaters all set to making sure the environment is above 7 degrees, I think this system's going to work out pretty well. And it's only going to cost us 370 watts. And I'm sure it won't be running very often because the only cold water that comes is between the eruption periods of the cool slush geyser. All the water coming from our colony should be decently warm. Now to clean and sanitize it, and I've got another decent idea. And here's our sanitizing station. All the water coming out of water sieve, and it doesn't matter if it is polluted or clean, because remember, clean water will just bypass through the sieve, then ends up into the sanitizing area, where it's getting doused with just a little bit of radiation. We have a liquid pipe germ sensor set to below 1 germ so that there are 0 germs. The liquid shutoff allows the water to pass. And with all this radiation, there's never going to be germs in here. So now we've kind of reduced the whole system down to 2 pipes. One's the return pipe and one's the ingest pipe. Now it still looks a little bit more complicated because again, I'm still getting rid of all of this water here. So I have a liquid filter here that sends all the polluted water up and all the clean water over, and the clean water just jumps in the clean water line. This clean water line splits off to the soda fountains, the rehydrators, and eventually the SPOM. And that's the entirety of the water supply system now. I'm really looking forward to getting rid of this because it's really going to clean out the area. So much so that you may have noticed we're not taking water in or out of these tanks. They're not needed anymore, save the fact that one of them is the fish tank. I'm fairly confident that we're no longer going to need a pitcher pump because I don't believe we're going to be doing any more research left on this colony. But in the eventuality that we do need some fresh water for whatever reason, we have the pitcher pump here, and I can just tie a liquid vent right here off the main water line. We've already managed to empty about 10 buffer tanks that we were using, which is going to free up this area for all sorts of activities. The last thing I want to do is actually test this system out. With our new bathroom system being a closed loop, and the fact that we're going to be dumping the excess polluted water that the dupes produce into the trees, I no longer really need this liquid reservoir. In fact, it'd be good if we didn't have it because, remember, each tree is going to take 70 kilos worth of polluted water per cycle. Well, we have 12 dupes producing 6 kilos in excess, which means we're producing 72 kilos per cycle worth of polluted water. So one tree is going to stay growing 100% of the time, and the other one's going to grow about 3% of the time. Well, after we get rid of this entire tank, and all of these tanks, and this giant pond, like, it's going to be a while. But I can separate that water sieve, and then isolate the buffer tank, and then I'm going to just route that buffer tank right through our sanitized line, just to see the power of what this system can do, considering right now there's 3.2 million germs in this one buffer tank. All right, that water is flowing, and you can see the germs coming into the buffer tank and being destroyed faster than, I'm going to say, about 8,000 germs per second. Oh, this is incredible. And you thought chlorine was a good source of cleaning? This radiation is absolutely crushing it. So I know our afterpick is not exactly as transparent as I was hoping about how much we truly cleaned up the plumbing in this colony. I am much happier with it though, because it's very, very streamlined. All the water comes in here, gets heated and stored, and then sanitized. So I only have to be concerned with 2 pipes, one polluted and one cleaned. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as you can really enjoy a plumbing episode. But either way, I'm looking forward to hearing about it in the comments below. So until next time, much love, happy gaming, and I'll talk to you soon.